Yeah. Have you seen any of these commonalities with other cultures? Like, have you seen other cultures that share that same perspective with Native Americans as about animals or other
Animals? Yeah,
creatures?
yeah, in general, yeah, sure. This is sort of animism, you might say. And animism is found in several distinct societies around the world, but it pops up differently. So, to some degree, Australian Aboriginal culture is animistic in the fact that they all have souls and animals have souls. On the other hand, Australian Aboriginal mythology and religion and cosmology is just absolutely radically different from that of Native Americans. So there's huge, huge differences between the systems, even though they all might be sort of animistic. So what ties in the sort of the Native American systems? This is true in North America, Central America, South America, all the way down. Is this sort of package of shamanism plus animism, a particular core practice, as well as particular core mythologies that really tie all these areas together. And it's actually not just the Americas; it actually is also, to some degree, in the circumpolar realm, right, the Russian Far East, and really all the way over to the Sami, right, in Lapland. They also had traditions of shamanism and animism. But it's basically when you talk about sort of the Native American package, you sort of mean the Americas and the circumpolar realm, and you can talk about those as sort of a fairly cohesive cosmological view. The shamanism is found all throughout that realm and nowhere else. I really, people talk about Irish shamanism. It's bogus. That's no, it never happened.
Interesting. Um,
I
I mean,
mean, it happened, but we
it
certainly
kind
have
of,
no proof it happened. I shouldn't say it never happened because we don't know, but there is certainly no proof of it happened. I should say that. That's a more
okay,
positive
interesting.
statement.
Yeah. Was that something I'm curious to ask a little bit about it? Things like that term Irish shamanism or that belief.
Yeah, it's sorry. In Europe, they very often use the term shamanism to mean anything that's not like an organized religion. But this is not really, from an anthropological point of view, it's not accurate. Shamanism is a very distinct thing that is found at an incredibly deep timeline, again, in all of the Americas and in the circumpolar realm. So shamanism plus animism produces this sort of particular flavor, you might say, of this of how to think about animals and how to interact with the spirit world and that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. So that is interesting.
Let me
I'm
point out one
curious.
more thing while I'm thinking about it, while we're on
Yeah.
the topic. I was talking about how these things link up with cosmologies, and so why is alien belief so high? Right? You might say, well, that's because aliens are here. It's perfectly plausible. But let's think if it's choice B, if the aliens are not here, why is alien belief so high in America and not say in Iceland? Right? You might say, well, the aliens aren't visiting Iceland; they're only visiting here. Maybe, but maybe there's other reasons. So, why aliens and not fairy folk, right? Why is the one ridiculous, the one little green man ridiculous, and the one plausible? And so, one of the things about the aliens is it's this idea of going up into the heavens. This works out well in Abrahamic cultures, right? Because up is good, heaven is good. Right. If I be up on high, that's good. That's where God is. The devil is down there in the abyss. And these are all metaphors. We know that the Earth is a little globe spinning around, and what's up now will be. But on the metaphor. If you ask people in the street, quick point to heaven, everybody points up. Right. So up is good in our culture. If I say you're getting a high grade in my class, I mean you're getting a good grade. Why? Why is high good? Because that's where God is in our mythology. There's other mythologies where the divine is down there, so low is good. High is getting away from God. Right. So why do we like space? Why do we like the idea of going to space? And why do we look to the heavens for sort of rescue? I think it aligns very, very well with Abrahamic mythology. Again, most Americans believe sort of the ancient aliens, but most Americans also believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, both over 60%. What that means is many people believe both, right? You have a lot of Christians who are also alien believers, right? There's a lot of commonalities. We're going up to the skies. We're going to get. We're going to ascend, either a day of judgment thing or just from a big UFO. And so I think it's very appealing for people to look to the heavens for answers coming from an Abrahamic creation story.
Interesting. Okay. So that's kind of fascinating because the first thing that came to my mind was like a couple hundred years ago, the church was killing people for talking about the possibility of aliens, and now these ideas are merging together. I think actually NASA hired like a couple of years ago, I think a bishop or priest to help counsel astronauts if they meet an ET. So
So far, we haven't had to use that, so just keep that in mind.
yeah,
But yeah, yeah. So yeah. So you have like, and a lot of people are combining these beliefs in some religious traditions in America, like the Latter Day Saints, the Mormons. This is explicitly a part of the sort of Book of Mormon. The Jehovah lives on a planet, and the Garden of Eden was another planet. It all has like space travel and stuff built in, and there are other inhabited worlds with other aliens that Jehovah rules over. So like LDS, which is a fairly old church now, fairly well sort of a mainstreamed church has this built in. And of course, this is a very American thing. It started fairly late in the Americas. And then you've got a whole bunch of these newer ones, right? Scientology is all about alien travel and stuff. Their mythology stories. The Ryalians. Have you heard of the Ryalians?
no, I've not.
Oh yeah, check out the Rye aliens. So they claim to be in direct contact with aliens, and in fact, I think their leader claims to be an alien, and they claim to do all this sort of amazing things. And it's fast-growing international religion, actually, and the Rye aliens, and it's all built around space travel. So the alien phenomena is quickly becoming very religious, right? You're
Yeah.
getting a lot of religious overtones, and people speak about spiritual experiences with aliens and things. So is it alien belief can either be presented as a legend, like maybe this happened, maybe it didn't, but it can also, for some people, take on a sacred quality, which is to say, a mythic quality, right? That these came down and helped create who we are, and therefore who we are part star children, and therefore we need to explore Mars rather than saving the Earth, right?
Okay.
So this is a big part of the package, I think.
Okay. So, looking cross culturally, do you see things where it would help open the floodgate historically for why suddenly in the modern day people are okay with Jesus and aliens, or why?
Well, they're
Uh,
pretty congruent, I think, like that. There was the big book that was very influential, right? The von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods. And he basically said that the Bible is really about aliens, right? And all these angels coming down from the skies are really aliens coming down from the skies. So these two strands for many millions and millions of Americans, I would say probably most Americans, we look at the statistics, have sort of merged through this sort of thing, which I find fascinating. And again, I think like for most traditional Native American viewpoints, that would be sort of, again, not really interesting, right? They're much more, I think, concerned about life on Earth than the absence of life outside of Earth.
okay. All right. So, actually, still talking about the Earth, let's go in reverse direction. You talked about earlier how there's religions that or cultures that down below is where God is. So
Yeah,
what
or the Earth
cultures out
itself,
there?
or the Earth itself, and that's where heaven is. That's where you go when you die, right?
Mhm.
But in Abrahamic traditions, we leave the Earth, and eventually, if you remember the story, God destroys it and takes everybody up. So in the Abrahamic traditions, the Earth is not sacred, it is not heaven, it is not numinous, it's mundane, it's temporary, and God's going to destroy it right before He takes all of the deserving people up to heaven. Right? That's the story. So at that point, like, why care about the earth? It's not spiritual, it's not mundane, it's not heaven. But if you come from traditions like Native Americans, or even maybe more dramatically, the Australian Aboriginal traditions, this is heaven. This is where you go when you die, and this is where God is. So don't mess it up. Right? You wouldn't tear down heaven, you wouldn't mine heaven, you wouldn't pollute heaven. Right?
All right. So what are so getting outside of the Abrahamic traditions, what are the cultures you found that you know aside from Native Americans that celebrate Earth as heaven or an
Yeah, I
underworld?
would say a lot of cultures. I would say it goes along with animism, the sort of belief that other living things have souls. Very often, this is including the earth itself, including maybe rivers or even stuff like that. And I think the most heightened version that I know of this is the Australian Aboriginal version, which is again that the earth is where everything sacred is. They actually have stories about how the earth was created, but in Australian traditions, the main sort of creation time to pay attention to, the Earth was there, but it was completely flat in the beginning. And then came along the totemic ancestors, which are very important little beings to keep track of. And through their stories and their adventures, they created the topography, the mountains, the rivers, everything. They created the world in a sense. They shaped the world. It was already there, but they shaped it. So these totemic ancestors, then their stories are all about, the geology, right, and the hydrology, and so these stories will tell you where the water holes are. These stories will tell you what the topography is, right? And so you can think back. These stories have been going on for tens of thousands of years, and people that didn't, have writing or printed maps or something. But they allow people. You're living in one area, but you already know the topography because you have all these mythic stories. And so this is where all the spirits are. These are where the totemic ancestors are. It's sort of interesting too. There's one. When all this happens, this is called the dream time. And the idea is that the dream time is real and it's eternal, almost like heaven. But it's when the earth was formed. And the idea is that we are not quite on dream time. We've deviated. Again, maybe shades of Garden of Eden story here. But the idea is that you're trying to think about dream time because it's more real than our world. So you're always trying to improve your knowledge of the dream time, which is about the totemic ancestors and the landscape itself. And this is when, if you're trying to be a devout person in these traditions, you might go on a walkabout. You've probably heard of a walkabout. It's not just sort of wandering around. It's not like a Native American vision quest. It's very specifically, you are trying to follow the route of your totemic ancestor and sort of go over his stories. It gets complex.
Yeah.
How do you get your totemic ancestor? You usually have one. So how do you don't inherit it from your family. You don't inherit it from your community. In fact, you might have a different totemic ancestor than anybody in your village. So, but you might share this totemic ancestor with somebody in other villages or other speaking other languages. So religion in this sense, or denominations, you might say, was sort of spread throughout Australia, linking people from one end of Australia to other people in Australia that had never met each other, lived thousands of miles apart. And so, so how do you get your totemic ancestor? You get it depending usually on where your mother was with you when she was 5 months pregnant with you, or thereabout, 5 or 6 months. So in other words, it's where she was in the land when your soul came into your body. For them, it's somewhere around the 5 to 6 months of the pregnancy. And then that becomes your totemic spirit. So that your soul or your denomination, your chief deed, if you will, is actually comes from the ground itself with you when your soul enters your mother's fetus, right? So what this means is you grow up and you're like, oh, your totemic ancestor is, I don't know, jumping kangaroo. Oh, okay. Well, nobody else in the village shares that. So you go on a walkabout. You follow his story. You follow where jumping kangaroo went and all of the topography. Along the way, you might meet other people in your same religion. Probably don't even speak the same language, but they're also interested in these same stories about jumping kangaroo. So how do you communicate? You don't speak the same language. How do you pass on these stories? Very often not with words. Very often with abstract designs, dances, dance moves, songs, singing. And so you would be on a walkabout, and they have the cave paintings and things that also might relate to these. You'd meet other people who are also on the same walkabout, trying to learn about, jumping kangaroo. And then you share these stories and this knowledge, very often without words. So in Australian Aboriginal tradition, it linked the whole continent was linked with people. I think this is why they never, ganged up on each other and went to war either, right? It's like, hey, this village, let's go attack that village. Well, wait a minute, there's a couple of guys in there that are my religion, and none of you guys are, right? So religion, I think, acted as a very sort of interesting, homeostatic mechanism. It looked like all these groups were completely dispersed, speaking all these different languages, but they shared identities dispersed across the landscape.
Wow.
So fascinating. It was just built in. Who you were as a person, it all came from the landscape. Who everybody was as a person comes from the landscape.
Wow, that is pretty cool. That is I've not heard of that anywhere before.
Yeah, and so this is why Australian Aboriginal traditions are very often opposed to large-scale development, mining, and this is a constant tension in Australia. Australia is one of the worst polluters in the world, and just recently, some great big mining company just ripped up a 40,000-year active traditional site, and then just sort of said, "Oops, sorry." So there's still a lot of cultural tensions around this in Australia, to be sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see why. 40,000 years. A lot of
Yeah, this is Australian
historians
Aboriginal
could have
tradition is
learned.
the world's longest lived religious tradition in that sense. It's been, the initial colonization of Australia is like 60,000 years. The last major influx about maybe 45,000 years ago of any people. And so it's been developing on its own for that long, right? And it's developing uniquely. Nobody 45,000 years ago, until sort of the British colonists sailed over, nobody had come to Australia. So they've been developing on their own trajectory for a long time.
That's amazing.